When I woke up this morning, I was feeling pretty dangerous.
Welcome back to Draftvice. My name is Walter. We're here today. We're doing two teams again. I skipped out on yesterday's episode because we had some technical difficulties. I broke a lot of things. Well, I broke one thing, and we don't need to go into that. We need to go into the Giants and the Seahawks because you know what? They're important because they wear blue. Today's Blue Day. That's where I'm going with this, right? It's all blue all the time. So let's go to the big blue wrecking crew, the New York Giants. Yes, they play right in my backyard, the Meadowlands, and people must be going like, Walter, why aren't you a Giants fan or a Jets fan? I go, hold on, man. We're not talking about my fandoms here. We're talking about the Giants. So let's talk about the Giants, right? New head coach, Joe Judge. Old GM, Dave Gettleman. And now they bring in a couple of interesting, intriguing pieces to their coaching staff, right? They get Garrett. Jason Garrett of the Dallas Cowboys goes across the division, goes right ahead and signs up to be the offensive coordinator with Joe Judge. Now, it's been a while since we saw Garrett be a coordinator, right? So that's an interesting one. And then the one that was a little less surprising was Patrick Graham being the D coordinator, follows Joe Judge from New England, and then also, Patrick Graham did his stint last year in Miami. And listen, take it what you will. That defense played with its heart, even though it was missing a lot of pieces towards the end of the year. Did have a couple of what the heck's going on here calls, but it felt like those were almost intentional to try and lose games. Hello, the Steelers. Anyway, I was just referring to a specific play. Let's not even worry about that. We're talking about the Giants, right? So, Patrick Graham, intriguing candidate, right? We know, Joe Judge has experience with him. Jason Garrett, a little bit less sure how that ended up lining up. And then we have Dave Gettleman, yes, the Dave Gettleman, the man who's run the drafts for the last 3 years when they keep on picking in the top 10. And they pick good players, and people have acknowledged this. Dave Gettleman picks good players. He doesn't always pick the most valuable player. He picks good players, right? Or, as far as we go. And this year, actually, I might be one of my favorites of his drafts. I think a lot of people are giving him praise for this year's draft. I actually gave him praise for last year's draft outside of the Daniel Jones pick. I told people, man, if you swapped the DeAndre Baker pick last year with Daniel Jones, I think less people are complaining. And people, I think that set people in a weird, like, oh, I guess maybe you're right there thing. Which doesn't mean I actually did or didn't agree with the Daniel Jones pick. I kind of felt like it was a weird directional send-off compared to the year before where you took Saquon Barkley instead of quarterback. We are not relitigating the 2018 and 2017 drafts. No, the 2019 drafts. We're hanging on, and today we are doing the Giants with Dave Gettleman and Jason Garrett and Patrick Graham and Joe Judge. And Joe Judge is interesting, little mayo for my taste. Not in his skin complexion. Don't be racist. I'm just saying he comes off as a no-nonsense guy, but he also doesn't come off as a guy with a lot of personality. Kind of reminds me of a few people I've met in my life. Just kind of like, all right, yeah, I get that. Anyway, let's go into the draft, right? So, because that's why you're here. You're here for the draft and maybe some free agency talk, and then we'll go into the rest of their coaching and roster. So, we'll go into the draft first, and we'll go back into the free agent acquisitions. Their first pick, man, I like their first pick. One of my favorite players in this draft was Andrew Thomas, a top 10 player. If I had a board, he would probably be top 10, top 12 on my board. That's not saying much because I don't actually have a team that I pick for. I do have the Browns, but I don't work for them. So let's discuss that, right? I like Andrew Thomas, right? He's played on the left side tackle. He also played previously on the right side when he first started his freshman year. So he's versatile. He's probably my second favorite tackle in this draft class outside of Jedrick Wills. He's a decent mover. Just always seemed, even when you thought he was beat, he just always seemed to kind of get the job done. Aggressive, decent, like I said, decent mover, a really good pass pro, and even a good run blocker. So I think he's an upgrade over Nate Solder. Some of the times I would think some of the things he did were very reminiscent of what Nate Solder does well. But you could definitely, stick this guy at one of your tackle positions and feel comfortable because, again, he's been a 3-year starter. You've gotten to see him play in the SEC. He's gone up against a lot of good competition. I love that pick. I love the player. And, again, I think this is a team that's looking to move away from the Nate Solder years and move on to some younger offensive talent, build up the tackle spots, and go ahead and build around their young quarterback, Daniel Jones. So now they've got Andrew Thomas. Again, like I said, second favorite tackle in this class. Probably again, like as far as it goes, if you're really looking for a tried and true left tackle, was maybe the better, maybe the better of the tackle fits for left tackle. He might come in and start at right tackle if they keep Nate Solder on the left side because, again, Nate Solder probably would have a harder time flipping sides because you've been in the NFL for so long playing at that position. You're almost kind of set in your ways, whereas getting a younger guy to flip sides is not as hard, it seems like. We've seen this with some older veterans just kind of switching sides. It doesn't always seem to work well when they've gotten into their later stages of their career. But that's not the only tackle they took. They also took Matt Pert out of Connecticut. That was an interesting one. The UConn guy he played right tackle, so maybe he's the future at their right tackle position. So I don't hate that idea because he was more of a developmental guy. But when you look at developmental tackles, like you look at Ezra Cleveland, who went in the second round a couple years ago, Brian O'Neill went in the second round. Developmental tackles seem to go in the top 100 if they're really good and they show a lot of upside. Pert's kind of relatively learning some of the nuances to the position. Definitely needs to get into an NFL weight training program. But when you compare him to a guy like Sadiq Charles, I had in like the same circle kind of type of tackles that they were. I thought he had more upside than Sadiq Charles. I actually probably would have went with Lucas Niang, but he had injury issues, so a lot of teams take that guy off their board, and that guy was still on the board at the time. There were a lot of guys who I liked better than Matt Pert at that, but I also thought, like, again, if you know how you want to use him and you think he fits your scheme and you're getting him in there and he's not starting right away. Matt Pert is not starting. Maybe he competes for the spot, but I think it's going to probably be Andrew Thomas and Nate Solder, and Matt Pert is going to be the heir apparent to whatever spot Nate Solder's playing, or heir apparent to the right side because Matt Pert's played on the right side, and Andrew Thomas can play both. So, love the O-line picks. I thought this draft show they had, and then they also went later on, day 3, Shane Lemieux, guard, tough, hard-nosed guard. And the reason why I am being all lovely towards, I love offensive line play. I don't know why I'm like that offensive line nerd kind of guy. Those are my favorite kinds of players. And Joe Judge made a point about this, right? He said to be a good team, you need a good offensive line. I agree with that. I agree with that mentality, and it shows in their draft, right? It shows in how they attacked this position. They went 2 tackles and a guard. They spent two top 100 picks on tackles. And thus, I think that you never really know how the roster develops during the season. He has the ability to play right and left. They've also mentioned very important is the versatility. Like I said before, he's played both sides. They mentioned a big thing about the school, right? Kirby Smart, how he runs his program. They go, listen, this is the perfect guy to, perfect, especially when you're dealing with these like COVID off seasons. That's the guy you want be coaching the guy who's coming into the NFL, 3-year starter. This again, Andrew Thomas was a good pickup. And again, Matt Pert, given the vision, if you have a vision for certain players, we were talking about vision the other day with another team. It's about we were talking about with the Matt Rule with the Carolina Panthers. Here they have a vision. They have a vision for some of these players, it sounds like. But let's move on. They also drafted Xavier McKinney out of Alabama, right? Good player. Very versatile safety. They have a very interesting safety rotation now, right? But this is something that's not uncommon to somebody like Joe Judge and Patrick Graham. Because he, I didn't want to just call him Patrick. It made it sound like they had the starfish from SpongeBob coaching the defense. Which, listen, that would be kind of cool, right? Like, did you know, SpongeBob works the Krusty Krab, but Patrick, he actually is the defense coordinator for the Giants. It's like, ooh, all right. So yeah, maybe he is. I don't know. Maybe he did. Maybe he is a starfish. I didn't get to really check out his credentials. Nonetheless, the starfish coordinator, very well known for being dealing with defensive backs in. Again, he's coming from Miami. They had they didn't really have as great of a safety core, although they did have Eric Rowe come in towards the end of the year, towards second half of the season kind of deal, and again got a little bit more of the play that they needed out of those players. Comes from New England, so again, their scheme is going to be very similar, at least defensively, probably to what New England's doing, right? And what does New England do? They rely heavily on safeties and coverage and man coverage, and again, those are players that you even saw this with the Chiefs, right? The Chiefs have a lot of guys. I think there's going to be a trend in the NFL where it's okay, maybe we can't get the best corners in the world, but if we get the best safeties, we might be able to cover up some issues with corner. We've seen some teams do this, by the way. And like I said before, this used to be kind of the mentality of the New England Patriots before they just went full defensive back and then just said screw it to pass rush and we'll just draft random guys and hope they turn out well, and they end up doing so. So I think that's the mindset that the Giants attack this with. They got Xavier McKinney. He can play nickel linebacker, strong safety, too high split safety. You have Jordan Love. He could play free safety if you do any single high looks. And they could definitely do a two safety. And I think they're going to be using a lot of three safety sets with Jabril Peppers, who kind of can also play a nickel linebacker role. Again, those two guys give you a lot of versatility on the kind of the middle of the field. And honestly, there's been some study, some statistical evidence that shows that if you have better coverage in the middle of the field, that's where a lot of throws are going nowadays. So if you make them have to throw outside the numbers, that's going to be the harder throw. That's the stuff that, or the lower completion percentage throws. They're also the bigger game-changing throws. But if you're making guys have to throw it outside the numbers, there might be a plan here where they say, listen, we'll get a bunch of guys to cover up, I'll make the middle hard to throw to, and you make them throw the outside. And if you have a weak-armed quarterback, you're not making that throw. And thus you now created a defensive scheme that's very beneficial. So I like the Xavier McKinney pick. Hard-nosed leader, Alabama defense. People were talking about in the first round. I thought that was kind of weird because I didn't think he's not as plus of an athlete as some of the other safeties. Very big mental guy. Again, coming from Nick Saban, defensive backs, defensive guru, former, NFL coach, and, teams love that. Teams love Nick Saban's guys, and he has the ability to communicate to them, hey, this is what this guy does well. This is what he'll do on your defense. This is what, so when you're coming out of Alabama, especially a guy like this, he probably got a lot of high marks from Nick Saban. So I imagine that a lot of these teams were very appreciative of like, oh, this guy can do X, Y, and Z in our system. And it just sounds like he fit exactly what the Giants want to do. And between those three safeties, I think they're going to be really well set at safety. Given that, and they just extended Jabril. They gave him the 5th-year option, right? So between Jabril Peppers, who they have for the next 2 years, Julian Love, and Love, Peppers, and McKinney. Man, that's a good safety core right there. That's a good rotation. So all right, so they weren't just drafting safeties and tackles, right? I mentioned before Shane Lemieux. It's not all safety and offensive line. They drafted Darnay Holmes from UCLA in the 4th round. They mentioned, he's got good speed, shows some nasty, plays bigger than his size. I mentioned before Shane Lemieux. They mentioned how tough he was, how powerful he was. They talked about the Auburn game, how he's tossing bodies around. There was a lot of people who were like, this is like Will Hernandez Jr., like Will Hernandez, who they drafted in the 2nd round a couple years ago. This looks like the heir apparent to Kevin Zeitler, potentially, for when he leaves, when his contract is up. And if not, then they have to go ahead and figure that out. But at least it's one of those opportunities to go ahead and flush out your roster with younger players as older guys age out. Zeitler's amazing. I love Zeitler. But again, a guy who fits a similar scheme build and a system. So again, you can go ahead and when Zeitler's done, you have now a guy hopefully waiting in the wings to come in. So I thought that was a good pickup. They went after Cam Brown from Penn State. Big, He runs well. He's 6'5", plays aggressive. They mentioned that he could be, he's versatile. He could play the edge. He could also kind of be a stack linebacker as well. Can be moved around by game plan and by need. They talked to other guys on Penn State, and they all mentioned like he was the alpha dog guy. He was their guy, go-to guy. He was the leader. So they really liked that player as well. Then they, seventh round, they went and got Carter Coughlin out of Minnesota, more of a linear guy, edge rusher. Name of the game is speed here. High motor guys, aggressive, can get value coming in to compete. And again, they had like 4 7th-round picks. So they also went with T.J. Brunson out of South Carolina, a bit smaller, stacked will linebacker, fast, good instincts. They were saying plays at 230, good value. They fits in the special teams guy. Is going to make tackles sideline to sideline. They said. I'm not necessarily saying this. This is what they're saying. This is the Joe Judge and the but what Joe Judge did mention is South Carolina's scheme isn't simple. So that means he's been coached hard. It's a good culture, communication element on the field. So they really liked his play on the field. They really liked the school he's coming out of. Again, some of these teams, they are school scouting. They were saying, listen, we know the coaches there. We know how their defensive system comes out. Like, for me to be, like, judging somebody by a school, much harder because I don't know all the play calls. I don't know these guys talk a lot to these coaches. They have ties. They have connections. So when they're saying, like, this guy's coming out of this system, he made these calls. That's important. Again, they went again with another cornerback out of Minnesota, Chris Williamson. They talk about how he's got good size, long, he could run. He might have some safety corner versatility flex, good size and speed combo, can compete for a role on their team. Dude, that defensive, again, defensively, and they spent a lot of picks on defense on day 3 because they're trying to get guys to come in and compete for roles and fill out the back end of this roster, guys who can all play on special teams. Joe Judge, special teams coordinator. That's not probably why he's doing it, though. They also got Tay Crowder, linebacker out of Georgia. Used to play running back, converted, 245-pound kid. He runs and plays at 4'6", and has only been playing a couple years at linebacker. So, again, another, they throwing darts at linebacker because, again, you don't want to spend heavy on that position. Again, this is the Patriots scheme. They like versatile linebackers who could rush, who can cover, who could tackle. So, again, I thought this was an interesting draft. All their day 3 picks kind of seemed like we're going to try and bulk load and try to get like a decent amount. And they had a bunch of 7th-rounders. So, again, you're trying to get like shots at special teams guys who are going to build out the rest of your roster. Name of the game on day 3 was speed and mostly defense, like I said before. And all the 7th-round guys they mentioned have developmental qualities and tools that will help potentially get them on the roster and help develop them into real starters into the future. I thought this was a very good draft. Like I said before, I've not been the biggest Dave Gettleman fan. I thought but I'm kind of liking what I see here, and it seems like there's a cohesive vision. I think the problem with Gettleman was it wasn't necessarily his drafting, it was his team building, right? For instance, are you in a rebuild? What's your vision for the future? 1 minute you're drafting a running back 2 overall and signing Alec Ogletree, but then like the next year you're taking a quarterback who maybe wasn't as good as some of the quarterbacks in the previous year. We really don't know. This is more opinions and stuff like that. So let's go into their offseason a little bit. They exercised the 5th-year options on Evan Ingram and Jabril Peppers. Already mentioned Peppers. That seems really good. Now you have these guys locked up for the next 2 years. These are still only guaranteed for injury until the beginning of the 5th year. Which again, like that's. This is the last year you get to do it. Also, these guys are picked towards the end of the 1st round, so they were a little bit cheaper 5th-year options, which explains why they were also more likely to get picked up. They signed Dion Lewis. They signed Blake Martinez. Corey Coleman they re-signed. The big news one was James Bradbury out of Carolina, a guy who actually Dave Gettleman drafted when he was in Carolina. Colt McCoy is signed on as a backup. Nate Ebner, the safety. Cameron Fleming, another offensive lineman, who has played with Jason Garrett actually in Dallas. They also got outside linebacker Kyler Fackrell for a cheap deal. They formerly of the Packers, and Levine Toilolo, formerly of the 49ers, and also of the Falcons for a 2-year cheap, $6.2 million deal. Cheap, right? $3 million a year. Sign me up. Play tight end. I probably would not do well at that position. They also re-signed David Mayo to a 3-year deal. So a lot of these like little bits and pieces around there. You saw a couple of big names, but mainly Blake Martinez and Bradbury were the big name signings. Dion Lewis, I'm intrigued by Dion Lewis, right? I'm intrigued by Dion Lewis on the same team as Saquon. I did a looking forward episode a couple weeks ago. I think I even mentioned this being one of the more intriguing prospects of that free agent signing. So if they can get the two of them in a backfield at the same time, I think it's a very interesting running back room. He probably also has a little bit more special teams ability. Corey Coleman, I actually kind of intrigued by. And you can see they didn't draft any receivers. I think they feel okay with their receiving room right now between Tate and Sterling Shepard and Darius Slayton, who I thought came on really well last year. I got to look at his tape going into this year. I'm going to start being able to I'm going to start pulling from that, and so we're going to get into when I start looking into the future for these teams. That's a guy who I'm really intrigued by. Corey Coleman, again, former first-round pick towards ACL last year, but we know those can kind of take a while to come back from. But again, the receiving room, it doesn't seem like all that bad. But it's a lot of guys who aren't that tall. So you're going to hopefully get a lot of production out of your running backs, your tight ends. You have Saquon Barkley. You got Evan Engram. Hopefully your scheme helps out. But again, it is Jason Garrett. He can be Jason Garrett. So I'm not sold on Jason Garrett as an OC yet. I do like a lot of the pieces they put into this team. They also franchise tagged Leonard Williams, who has a grievance against the Giants right now for tagging him as a D tackle instead of a D end, and the difference is about $1.7 million. I don't know what's going to probably come out of that. Sometimes the team and the players split the difference a lot of the time. They did lose Halapio, Marcus Golden, and Lattimore. Golden, actually, they hit with the UFA tender, which is basically, so if you know how the compensatory pick formula works, is that like the day after the draft, basically if you sign anybody after that, you doesn't count towards the pick formula, even if they would have counted towards the pick formula before the draft. So what happens is you hit somebody with this tender, and you still, this is like it still gives you the opportunity to get a pick out of the compensatory pick formula. And if they don't sign by a certain date, they become basically a restricted, exclusive rights restricted to your team. So that's this has only been used like twice since I've been watching football. I think the Patriots did it a couple of years ago with LeGarrette Blount. It's a relatively, but we know Blount signed with another team eventually. It is an intriguing decision on their end. I think it's to try and force Marcus Golden's hand, as well as if he signs a decent-sized deal to get him to count towards their pick formula for next year, because they only really signed one big contract, but also they didn't really lose a lot of guys who signed big contracts either. The defensive backs on this team are very intriguing, right? You're just going down the list, right? You got James Bradbury at corner, and on the other side, you maybe have DeAndre Baker. You maybe have the guy who they drafted last year, who what's his name? Before I get into that, well, their D tackles are also kind of crazy too. I'm actually kind of curious if they keep all these D tackles there, right? They've got Dexter Lawrence, Dalvin Tomlinson, B.J. Hill, I believe, is still on the roster. Why is he not popping up on here, though? Leonard Williams. Oh, yeah, he is there. Chris Slayton, Austin Johnson, O'Shane Jimenez. A lot of, interesting pieces on their defense. I mentioned before, they have DeAndre Baker, Sam Beal, who they took in the supplemental draft, Corey Ballantyne, who played a little bit last year. They got James Bradbury. And then it's weird because their depth charts changed a little bit because they add in just standard DB. Because they have a bunch of defensive backs on this roster. So Julian loves Xavier McKinney, Jabril Peppers. I like their safety room. Baker, you're hoping he's going to take a step forward in year 2. Bradbury, I don't look at him as a true number 1 corner, but he's good. He played pretty well when he was in Carolina. So, he's probably that next tier down. He's not like a true shutdown guy, but he's probably like a low-end 1, high-end 2 corner, which is kind of a nice kind of player to have, right? He's not the top-tier talent, but he's good, and he helps set up your defense very well. And again, when you have this rotation of good safeties, a decent corner on one side, and then maybe you can build up around, DeAndre Baker, and maybe Sam Beal shows up. I mentioned before Nate Ebner. They have a lot of pieces on that back end. Linebacker, it's a lot of names, right? Martinez, Mayo, a lot of Fackrell, guys who you're hoping you can get a little bit of production from and cover your rear end as guys who you drafted in on day 3 can kind of help develop. The offensive line, I'm actually kind of curious about, right? They have Spencer Pulley now at center. Will Hernandez, Nate Solder, Kevin Zeitler, Andrew Thomas, Matt Pert, Shane Lemieux, Cam Fleming. You have a lot of depth now, a lot of young guys there, some cheap backups. You got, you have a lot of good on that line, and you have a lot of interesting. The only position I'm really curious about that I'm a little shocked they didn't really truly address was center. And they no longer have Halapio. Maybe they bring him back. They didn't tender him, so maybe they were looking to give him back a little bit cheaper. Maybe they make a trade for somebody, or somebody becomes available. But offensive line, decent offensive line. Receiving core, again, like I said before, kind of an intriguing receiving core. I liked what I saw from Darius Slayton, and Evan Ingram's still there. Levine Toilolo's kind of replacing a little bit of what you lost when you lost Red Ellison. You have Eric Tomlinson, who can kind of play a little bit of tight end 3 or fullback role. And then you have Colt McCoy and Daniel Jones. I think this is a very intriguing roster. As far as their prospects for 2020, I think they are going to be a harder team to beat. Now, again, the big problem here is Joe Judge is coming off of a short offseason, not the ability to have all the guys in the room and kind of, not getting rookie mini camp and getting the benefit of being a rookie head coach, of where you get the extra time with your players and not being able to be in the room with everybody. So I do think that they are going to be a little bit of a disadvantage. I like a lot of the pieces, though. I don't think they are the worst team in their division. I don't think they're one of the worst teams in the NFC. I don't think they're one of the worst teams in the league, like I was thinking a couple of years ago when everything was kind of falling out of place. It seems like now they are taking the time to go ahead and address positions of value in certain ways. I'm still not a big fan of Blake Martinez, but he's a piece of the defense. He's still, a good tackler, good downhill guy. But again, the Packers didn't really want to keep him around either. Mayo was a good idea to keep him on just because you needed depth at the linebacker position. I feel like that's their one weakness. But if you look at their defensive back room, I think they're going to be playing a lot of nickel and dime anyway, so I'm not really worried about that if I'm the Giants. And then they also have some of the best, they have a bunch of D linemen. Like I said before, Tomlinson, Dexter Lawrence, Leonard Williams, B.J. Hill. They have a big, and as far as pass rush goes, they don't have any truly great pass rushers. O'Shane Zimenez, you're expecting to take a step forward. Kyler Fackrell played okay for the Packers. Was more of a rotational guy in recent years past. So again, you're looking to see what you can get out of all these players. I kind of am very intrigued by this roster. Joe Judge intrigues me as a coach. And listen, good on you guys, Giants. I'm intrigued by your team. So let's move on, right? We've done the team that is intriguing because they have a new head coach. What about the team that's the playoff perennial contender, but I was always making you scratch your head? Yes, I am talking about the Seattle Seahawks, because P.D. Sunshine, Pete Carroll, That's a name I'm borrowing for a minute. They just always seem to kind of like make you a little bit perplexed about what they're doing, how they value things, and about how they go about stuff. And that's just how it is. I never quite gauge what the hell they're doing. They sometimes make picks that'll make you go, "Why did you do that?" And they still end up making it the playoffs because I mean, part of it is they have Russell Wilson, and part of it is they do get performance out of certain guys because they do like taking a lot of mid-round picks and developing them into something really amazing. They will miss on like their first 3 picks, but then they'll get 3 guys in the middle rounds that are really good. Are there any guys this year like that? Well, let's see. First off, first round pick, they drafted Jordan Brooks out of Texas Tech. This is not who a lot of people saw this draft and saw this pick in the first round. They were all like, "What? Who is that?" And listen, I think what happened was they had a trade. They wanted to trade down at the last minute. They didn't get their trade down, and they were like, "This is the guy we targeted. We wanted to trade down and get an extra pick in the mid round. We're kind of a little annoyed here, but this is who we're taking." And thus they took Jordan Brooks. They had a trade set up with Green Bay. That fell through. There might have been a couple of other guys. So let's talk about Jordan Brooks. Now, I think the theme of their draft, the Seahawks draft, it was grit. They took a lot of guys with a lot of personal baggage in their background. Not bad baggage, but just that they've dealt with things and personal things. And Pete Carroll talked about how it affected those players and how he thinks that those things like in your past, your personal history, help you grow as a person. With Jordan Brooks, he was homeless for a bit, and they mentioned that listen, this is a guy who they can utilize a lot as far as a stack linebacker. He runs a 4.46. Really, he ran a 4.54 at the combine, but maybe they're talking about another measurement. Maybe they got it from the coaches. Maybe they got it from pro day. 230 pounds. He played out in space. He was a rover in the Big 12. Senior year, he played inside. Utah staff came down there, and the strength coach helped build him up and ripped him up into this year. And again, they talk about the hardship and makes it through made it stronger from the lessons he learned along the way. Pete Carroll mentioned how versatile he was. Played, was spying the QB, was rushing guys, can play inside, can play outside linebacker. Want to see where he can fit. They really liked him from the combine interview and from the formal interviews. And, they talked about the hard-nosed work ethic mentality. Came across as a great fit. A lot of speed on the field. They weren't really mentioning him as a Sam linebacker, but then it got mentioned in one of the post-draft conferences, and they were like, it could actually potentially be it. They also talked about the Senior Bowl, helped the eval. Schneider didn't really get to meet with him at the combine or at the Senior Bowl, but they did get people in the room with him and got to vet him. So they did appreciate the time they spent. They spent a lot of time with this guy. He probably was one of those prospects where, listen, they probably spent more time with this prospect than they did with a lot of other prospects just because they had the opportunity to. Now, granted, it wasn't Schneider always in the room or Pete Carroll, but it was their guys who were in the room with them. Guys who they trust because Seahawks have been, pretty good at this for a while. I thought this was an interesting pick. Again, I mentioned before, it seems like they wanted to trade down. They targeted this guy. They wanted him. The next guy they took as well, they mentioned they had targeted as well. They didn't think they were going to get him. They thought he was going to go higher. Might not have been big on draft circuits, as far as the internet and the Twitterverse, but these guys they really liked. They went ahead in second round. They got Darrell Taylor out of Tennessee. They were considered taking him at 1, at least they keep saying so. This is the problem with Pete Carroll, right? You really can't believe everything he says. So he's going to sit there and say, this guy's amazing. This guy's amazing. 7th-round pick, he's going to be doing great. He's going to be a superstar in the NFL. It's just how Pete Carroll talks. He pumps up everybody. I'm a big fan of that. Makes it hard to interpret what he's planning on doing, but I do appreciate why he does it and kind of like the methodology and how he likes to build up the character of some of his guys. But he did say this is a guy who is in consideration for round 1. They kept it quiet that they wanted to get him. They were shocked that he fell through. View him as a top-end pass rusher. Played through a stress fracture, so he dealt with a lot of had surgery at the end of the year. They had him in for a visit right before quarantine hit because, again, like he had the stress fracture. Upbeat personality, aggressive. Pete Carroll mentioned. Got to be up close and personal as a real edge. Was really effective on third down. Did a lot defensively. With very very diverse responsibilities. They compared him to Frank Clark a little bit, as in like again he's a more of a speed to power, some athletic ability. Slight ability to drop into coverage for a few snaps a game. They're probably not going to utilize that too often, but to give you a little bit of mix and match here, contribute early, good against the run, aggressive, good tackler, and they want to utilize a rotation at defensive end. They drafted a guy last year. They'll probably get somebody else in free agency. They'll sign somebody else. But again, they liked what they saw from the guy. One of the actually sometimes you'll get a little bit from the beat reporters kind of parroting outside thoughts. For instance, one of the beat reporters had mentioned other coaches have said to him that Joe that he's kind of raw. He's got 5-star potential, but 3-star traits, like 3-star play on his tape. And Pete was saying like, you know what? He was consistent. The coaches loved him. He's a culture setter, and the entire staff loved the guy when he's gonna battle. So those two guys were intriguing prospects. They weren't guys who necessarily everybody had high on their board, but again, Seattle comes at these things with a very specific vision, and I'm not at the time, like there's certain guys that they just kind of take and they, you know what, if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out, because again, they like taking those fire shots later on anyway. I don't really have much to add to those two picks. They seem to want to be able to utilize these guys to kind of fill out roles on their defense. Defensive end and linebacker are positions that they value. They like athletic linebackers. They like having a decent rotation of defensive ends and rushers and D linemen. They have Damian Lewis. They drafted Damian Lewis in the 3rd round. This is a guard, guy who I was kind of intrigued by, interior O-lineman, LSU. This is where they mentioned Ed Ogeron, head coach of LSU, has a very big connection with Pete Carroll. That was very clear. It was brought up multiple times. They're projecting him to play right guard because they've seen him do that. They saw him do it for 22 starts, playing big boy football in the SEC. So he's got good length for a guy who isn't tall. They like him. He's got a good anchor. You're gonna love the. He said Ogeron said to him, "Hey, you're gonna love this kid from the way he competes." Right, good length, and again, played some of the best guys in the country. LSU. I mean, you got to see it on some of the college football playoff games. Really good player. I was intrigued by his play. I think he fits what they kind of want to do. He even said that he was kind of a fan of the Seattle Seahawks a bit. So all three of these guys, I was mentioning before, they talked about the hardships that Brooks dealt with. All three of these guys dealt with some kind of hardship. Family member that was incarcerated, homelessness, and how those personal, background qualities may actually play into, hey, like it kind of adds to the grit. For instance, with Daryl, it was he had some personal background, and if you're dealing with personal background, you think about it, he played through a stress fracture. That was a lot less to him probably than having a family member be incarcerated, where the mental issues with that, the mental that takes to go through that is probably a lot harder. So they appreciated all these guys' mental makeup as well. Day 1 and 2, I think a lot of people had questions about the draft, but like I said before, it's very hard to critique the Seahawks because they just seem to find ways of manufacturing ways to make it work. And again, I like Damian Lewis. This is finally like one of those guys, like, okay, this is a guy who's going to come in, he's going to plug in, play right guard, compete with Fluker, and maybe you kick Fluker to the other side, or now you have like a good rotation. They also, by the way, got rid of Britt at center. Cut him, cleared up $8 million. So it seems like they're going to go for some. They cleared out a little bit of extra money there too. That was just something to mention. Day 3, right? Day 3, they go ahead. They draft Colby Parkinson out of Stanford, big guy, tight end. They met with him at the combine. Coach Schaub came in, was bragging about him. Schneider says he's a tough and smart, reliable guy. Pete Carroll was saying, like, you got to beef him up, give him a little bit better as a blocker, but he's already pretty good as a pass catcher. Round 4 they took DJ Dallas, right, wide receiver who moved to running back, versatile. John Schneider even mentioned that he was a high school QB. Pete Carroll mentioned a lot about the special teams element that this guy's going to bring to the table. He's try hard. He played Wildcat back in the backfield in college. Hopefully, he will contribute in different ways. Find different ways to fit him into the offense. Edge, Allen Robinson, Syracuse, they mentioned, right? This guy drafted in the 5th round for him. They wanted to build depth on the defensive line. Production and ability to do the stuff that guys who were picked higher were doing. Excited to get him in, work him out. He actually worked out with their guys out in Seattle, and apparently they kind of made the joke of like, listen, I guess that strategy worked for him. He's working out with our friends, our players in Seattle. Maybe the Echoes kind of, I don't think they really draft like that, but maybe hearing about that kind of pushes him up their board a little bit, or when he's there, it makes you go, let's take this guy. Contrasted with Darrell, both are classic edge rushers. Both have good get off, good leverage, strength, girth in the lower body. Really coordinated technique. They were shocked he was still there in round 5 as well. They also took a wide receiver, Freddie Swain, out of Florida. They mentioned he's got some swag, kind of a smart football player, competitor. Mentioned that the scouts, specifically Barry and Highsmith, had checked him out, and that his intelligence might put him ahead of the curve as far as adapting to the game, especially in this COVID offseason. And then finally, round 7, they took tight end Stephen Sullivan out of LSU, developmental prospect, was very open with Coach McPherson at the Combine and the Senior Bowl. Coach Ogron had told Pete Carroll, like, listen, our biggest mistake was that we didn't use them enough because we had so many good players and we tried to utilize them, tried to get them around, but we just had so many guys. Remember, they had Thaddeus Moss, they had Sullivan, they had Justin Jefferson, they had Jamar Chase, they had Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and when you have such a so many good guys in your offense, it's hard to kind of get them to really play, get them all to play at a certain level. Pete Carroll even mentions, like, they didn't use him enough, but he's like, he's particularly good as a receiver at the line of scrimmage, can see all the talent that he has. They're trying to play a football team that can play anywhere, in a park, in a street, in the driveway, in the backyard, in the valley, in the highs, in the lows, in the mountains. If you can you scream. They want guys who could fight. They want fighters, and they want guys who have some grit. Like I said, all these guys, all the top guys had a bunch of grit to them, and it's John Schneider said it's a never-ending study on what that mental makeup does for these players. And Pete Carroll even mentioned life experience molds you, and that life experience really does affect how they looked at some of these players. I'll talk quickly about their free agency. Because again, I did the looking forward episode, so actually, again, it was one of the teams that right before the draft I did. They re-signed Mike Upati, they signed Dorsett, they acquired Quinton Dunbar from the Washington team, they signed Chance Warmack, who took a year off, they signed Cedric Ogbuehi, formerly of the Jaguars, they signed Brandon Shell, formerly of the Jets, to a 2-year, $9 million contract, they signed Bruce Irving back, formerly of the Panthers, used to be a Seahawk, now they're reunited, and it feels so good. They re-signed Luke Wilson. They re-signed Jaron Reed to a 2-year deal. They're D-tackle. So again, they've listen. Just because you're paying attention to this is kind of a very underrated all season. They really took shots on O-line, right? Upati, Warmack, Fluker's already on the team. They got Ogbuehi and Brandon Shell, right? They lost Fant. He walked away. This is a very intriguing team. I am especially about how they've handled offensive line, a position that they've been kind of not considered good at over the years, right? So now you look at it, and you have a couple of guys competing for right tackler between Wheeler and Shell and Ogbuehi, and then left tackle you have Dwayne Brown, and you have Jamarco Jones backing him up. Again, another guy who compete for one of the other tackle spots. You have Ethan Posick, B.J. Finney, Phil Haynes, Damian Lewis, Mike Upati, Joey Hunt, Chance Warmack. They just got a lot of guys in that room who are going to come in and compete for spots, and hopefully that builds out a decent offensive line. I think that this is probably one of the more talented offensive lines I've seen them sport in a while. The only question is actually center, which they just cut their center. Don't know why they did that. Like, I actually liked, I thought that was their one other piece outside of Dwayne Brown that I thought was really good. So that was kind of a shocker. Wide receiver wise, they've got Metcalf, they got Lockett, they got Dorsett, they got David Moore. They signed Greg Olsen in free agency, who is released. Then he joined up with the Seahawks, so he's going to help coach up their tight end room while also being a great player. They've got Will Dissly still, although I don't know how much Will Dissly's going to be able to do. He's coming off a really bad injury. Luke Wilson, they re-signed. He's kind of more of a tight end 2, tight end 3 kind of guy, depth player, kind of a more specific role player. Chris Carson's coming off a little bit of an injury. Rashad Penny's coming off a major injury, ACL tear. So offensively, though, I think this is going to be a better offense than it was last year. Like, I think everything they put in this room, they spent a lot of effort and time and money to really throw at this offensive line. Outside of that, right, they also have the defensive line, right? They have Poona Ford, liked him a couple of years ago. Jaron Reed, L.J. Collier, Bruce Irvin's back as the Leo, also as off-ball linebacker. They got Bobby Wagner, K.J. Wright, Jordan Brooks, Shaquem Griffin, who actually I think if you could utilize him more as a rushing role would be intriguing. And their defensive backs, they got Shaquille Griffin, Shaquem's brother. They got Trey Flowers, Brad McDougal. They did release Tedrick Thompson, so a guy who was a 5th-round pick a couple of years ago, but more because they have Quandre Diggs at free safety, right? Guy who they traded for during the season last year. Dunbar's going to compete for a spot. Trey Flowers, Shaquille Griffin. Dude, I think this team's actually a lot better than it was last year, and last year they made it to the playoffs. So Seattle, I think, is on the route up. Like, this is kind of the sneaky team, right? Like, everybody's looking at, they had this kind of weird, dumb draft. Well, they filled out pieces in their draft. This is like we were talking about the Saints, right? The Saints did specific moves to help build out their roster. And now, granted, the Saints probably picked players that were higher on other people's boards. So I think that's why the Saints, when they do it, people no longer look at them like they're cuckoo bananas. But we've seen it before. Marcus Davenport, a couple years ago, they drafted. A lot of people didn't agree with them trading a first-rounder to go ahead and take Davenport, the Saints, I mean. So here with the Seahawks, they're doing kind of the same thing. They've kind of filled out a really intriguing roster. You do need to eventually have an heir apparent to Dwayne Brown. I like Jamarco Jones. I liked him coming out of Ohio State. I think there's a lot of pieces in that offensive line room where I'm not as worried about this offensive line anymore like we were a couple of years ago where Russell Wilson was running for his life. I like the receiving core, right? Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, Phillip Dorsett. These guys are fast. Some speed element to their offense. And then, you got the tight end room, which is intriguing as well. You got Greg Olsen finally, doesn't have going to be taking passes from Russell Wilson. Man, that's an intriguing element on its own right. Defense. Yeah, the defense does not have as many great players as it did before. They're probably going to be looking to build up their pass rush. But overall, again, the back end looks a lot better. Maybe they do sign somebody in free agency. Maybe they get Ziggy Ansah back on a cheap deal. Maybe they get somebody else who's kind of looking to make it back into the NFL because they seem to do that, and they do that really well. So, or maybe L.J. Collier takes his step forward. Maybe, again, Bruce Irvin, they brought him back. So those are big pieces to their defense. I think this is very. I think it might be weird to say, but I think the Seahawks got a lot better in this offseason, sneaky better, which is kind of an interesting thought. Don't tell anybody, though, because I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. So if you want to follow the podcast at Draftvice on Twitter, at Draftvice_football on Instagram, you can follow me at BROJO. Death is in the end of life. Punch like a delicious drink. And again, you can follow the podcast, like it, follow, subscribe, leave a comment, leave a review on the iTunes and anywhere else where you listen to podcasts. And Facebook, all those fun things. Have a good weekend. Have a good week. Maybe I'll be back tomorrow. Hopefully I have to do a little bit of dancing and singing to make my supper. So have a good day.